that election happened and everyone was questioning the authenticity of the results. But no one had the capacity to look through all the files uploaded on their portal.
Welcome to Transparency Talks, the podcast that brings you conversations about truth, transparency, and trust. I'm your host, Winston Mwale. And today we have two exceptional guests joining us. Sotiris Sideris, an award-winning data journalist based in Athens, and data editor, of course, at the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism, and Yuxi Wang, his collaborator on groundbreaking investigative work. Together, they were part of the production team behind Democracy Deferred, a comprehensive investigation into Nigeria's 2023 presidential election that raises critical questions about electoral legitimacy and the future of democracy in Africa's most populous nation. Well, welcome to both of you. Let's start with introductions. Sotiris, can you tell us about your background in data journalism and your role at the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism?
Sure, and thanks, Winston. As you said, I'm the data editor for the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism based in Athens, Greece. I also work with Reporters United here in Athens, another non-profit investigative network. And yeah, I've been working as a data journalist since 2017, mostly for Greek and European focused stories. And after I joined CCIJ in 2022, my focus expanded to other areas, but always with strong data component in its investigation. And for Democracy Deferred, the series on Nigeria's elections of 2023, I was working with Yuxi, mostly supporting her in investigating the data component of the series, and I'm happy to talk more about that.
And Yuxi, what's your background and how did you come to work on these investigative data projects?
So I actually come from social science studies. I studied sociology, nothing related to data actually. But after I graduated, I stayed in South Africa and Nigeria for a little bit and worked with the civic tech organizations in South Africa open up. That's where I learned my data-related skills and started working in data journalism. I've always been quite interested. And yeah, that's the journey.
Oh, wow. So let's dive in. About Democracy Deferred, what drew you both to investigate Nigeria's 2023 presidential election, and why was this story important to pursue?
Thanks, Winston. So the project started from a conversation with two data journalists from Nigeria. They were telling us about their work around the election, that the election happened, and everyone was questioning the authenticity of the results. But no one had the capacity to look through all the files uploaded on their portal. So they basically uploaded around 160,000 files onto the IR portal as a gesture of transparency. See, we have uploaded the polling papers for each polling station in Nigeria onto this portal. But no one was able to analyze it because it's such a big amount. It's hard to get them off the portal. It's hard to analyze, and no one have the capacity to do so. So that's where we started looking into this platform and see if we could do something around the data. And around the same time, there was a call for proposal from MacRock, and they have some funding around preserving important documents from these online sources to make sure that they don't get lost. So we applied for the funding, we got the funding. That is how this project got started. And for why this is an important story to pursue, I think a little bit from my personal perspective. I was actually in Nigeria during the 2019 presidential election. What I saw, a lot of my colleagues did was they didn't actually go for the election. The day was off, everyone was at their house, no one goes to work on the election day. A lot of people are afraid of violence, so they stay at home, they don't go out. But a lot of young people didn't vote. And if you look at the 2023 election turnout rate, it's less than 25%. And the reason behind that, I think, is the loss of trust in democracy. People kind of feel like, well, our politicians are corrupted. They're going to rig the election anyways, whoever I vote for. And like, why would I risk my life to go out there and face the violence and everything else? My vote doesn't even count. And I think that's a very big issue. I think it's getting more and more each election. People start to lose trust every election. And I think that's the reason why the story is important. You have to give people power in a way to make them feel like they can actually hold these politicians or political parties accountable. They could actually make some effort towards making the country a little bit better, or choosing even the better among the bad guys. So we start doing the story, even though it's after the election, revealing what is happening during the election, showing people that we were able to look through this data trove of 160,000 papers will give people some confidence. Thanks, Winston.
Oh, wow. Sotiris, I want you to just respond to the last part of the question. Why do you think this story was important to pursue? Because, I mean, with the Yuxi, she's a perspective, which I think could be different from yours.
It's not really different. I agree with Yuxi. It's about trust in democratic processes, really, that we see in Nigeria, but we see elsewhere. Like me coming from Greece, I can totally relate to some of what we've seen in Nigeria. Of course, different context, different extent, different way of doing things and of reporting. It's really about accountability reporting, as you said. It's about holding people and governments accountable, and it's something that we need to consider when it comes to elections specifically, because we have seen a lot of disinformation around this specific election as well. And as you know way better than me, disinformation around the elections is something that happens all over the world. So we want to make sure that we provide a fair image and, fair understanding to us and to people about what is happening on the ground in Nigeria. And we did that combining different methods and techniques, with data doing the heavy lifting of the reporting, of course, with the collaboration of us with the local journalists and media outlets that really reported from on the ground and interviewed people. So to respond to your question, I think it's about accountability and democratic processes and trust to the foundations of our world today. That's what I think about this one.
All right. This series is described as the most comprehensive journalistic investigation to date of Nigerian elections. What made this investigation so extensive? And what role did data play in building your findings? I'll start with you, Sotiris.
Yeah, it's really the volume of data that Yuxi and the data team at CCIJ managed to process. We are talking about, as Yuxi said, more than 100,000 documents from different election polling units across the country. And we managed, thanks to Yuxi, to process all of them and properly verify and fact check them. So that's what makes this investigation that comprehensive and the most comprehensive out there when it comes to covering Nigeria's elections.
And Yuxi, in your own opinion, what made this investigation so extensive, and what role do you think data play in building your findings?
As Sotiris said, I think it's mostly the fact that we were able to look through this amount of data, along with analyzing the election results with these documents. We were also able to archive all of them in Wayback Machine as they were removed by the Nigerian government during the process of our investigation. We also uploaded them to Document Cloud, which was a platform from our founder, Mark Rock, so that they are saved in a decentralized network, that they could not be tampered. So I think those are really like unique components. And from the data analysis, we were able to communicate with journalists on the ground to show them the findings, like with the data. For example, in which areas we saw a lot of papers does not have stamps and signatures, and then for them to go into the field and investigate in the specific issues. So the reportings are also data-driven. A lot of the times we have the data findings first, but we couldn't figure out why is it like this or what is behind the missing signatures or stamps. Then we hand it over to the journalists to do the field reporting. And it's a process with some back and forth communication until we consolidate our reporting with evidence, both from the data and from the field work.
All right. So as data journalists working on this project, what were the biggest challenges you faced in accessing and verifying information about the Nigerian election? Let's start with you, Sotiris.
Yeah, again, I think it's the volume and the manual verification of each document that was needed to be done. That was the main challenge, really, and try to figure out how and why so many different documents from different polling units, again, across the country, have messy kind of writing, they are heavily edited, and how we could explain this as journalists. So first of all is the volume and the manual verification that we went through. And then it was really trying to answer why all these edits and alterations on the documents.
And for you, Yuxi, as journalists working, particularly data journalists working on this project, what were the biggest challenges you faced in accessing and verifying data about this Nigerian election?
I guess from accessing the information part, we faced constant removal of documents from the IR portal. They removed documents for at least 4 times, and sometimes they remove it for a few months and then they recover access. And sometimes they remove it and it's gone forever. And now if you check the IR portal where they publish all the election documents, all of them are gone. Like you can't open any documents right now. And it has been really difficult for us because we've tried to send FOIA requests to the officials in the election commission, and there haven't really been responses to these questions. And a much easier question we sent to them about the local government area level results. So we know for the election, we have state level results, and then one level lower at the local government area level, who won the election for each local government area at what number of votes. Even for that data we requested, and it took, I think, 11 months before they got back to us with the data, which is printed and looks really hard to extract. It's really messy handwriting. On the accessing part, there were a lot of challenges. We were able to compile the data sets through scraping at various times, and also with the support of civic tech activist Mark Essens, who also archived the data from his side. We were able to compile both data sets together. From verifying the information side, as Sotiris is saying, I think the manual work to actually check the validity of the machine learning results is definitely one big challenge. At some point, I was faced with this challenge where I have accuracy of around over 80% from machine learning OCR, recognizing each number on the paper. But again, how do I verify the whole paper, right? So that was a big challenge. We were able to solve by doing cross-referencing on different numbers on the paper. Like some numbers would add up to a total votes. So like by verifying, cross-checking those numbers, we were able to do the verification. But that was a very difficult part. Another part, I guess, was just a general thing with these projects using machine learning. There's a lot of unpredictability. At the beginning, when we were contracting the OCR expert to work on the project, he could not give us, if he could be sure to reach the 80% accuracy rate, how long it would take, how much time, how much money. So all of those are a little bit uncertain. You would have to find out through the process as you were testing and then see the next steps. So there was a lot of estimating in between and a lot of uncertainty when you are in the process. But I'm glad we were able to find out something at the end. We were able to complete the process But among all of the experts we spoke to, none of them could promise us that they could do this. So I guess that was part of the challenge.
All right. Can you walk us through your methodology? How did you approach analyzing the electoral data to uncover patterns or irregularities? What kind of methodology did you use?
I would really ask Yuxi to respond to that because it's really her work and I want her to, take credit for it and, explain how she did everything, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, Yuxi, the ball is in your court.
Thanks, Winston. Thanks, Sotiris. A lot of these are very technical, so I don't think we need to go into the details. Think of it just as you have this amount of election papers, 170,000. They should all be in one form. So exactly the same paper printed and with numbers filled in, right? But all the papers look the same. All of them are from the same form. So the first step, when we are looking at the set of documents, we realize it sounds like a very easy thing. If it was printed, right? If the numbers are printed in the same form, it was clean, it was scanned properly, then it's going to be a very quick process that you were able to extract the numbers. But the challenges we had was first, the papers were rotated in different ways. So some of them would be upside down. Some of them would be sideways. We also have a lot of wrong papers for other elections, coalition papers, cancellation papers, which doesn't fit in with the format. There were also random pictures uploaded, like pictures of shoes, people's face shots. So all of those are in this one data set. So the first step for us is to rotate everything back. And this we were able to do by identifying like the logo of the election paper. And then after that, you need to get the layout of the paper to filter out those random papers that is not election papers or not presidential election papers. Because if you count those in the OCR, then you obviously end up with wrong results. So there is an algorithm we use to identify the layout of the paper. From there, we were able to filter out the wrong papers. For example, in the layout, we will know how many tables there are in a paper, how many boxes there are in a paper. The regular election paper would have like 2 tables, around 400 boxes. If you have more than that, then it means it's a different paper. So we were able to filter out all of those random papers or the wrong papers in this way. During the process, we also found a lot of papers with very low resolutions, which are blurred and illegible. You can't see anything from it. But by doing this layout and rotation, we were able to filter those out as well. After this, you have a clean set of the presidential election forms with handwritten text. And what we did was to identify the stamps and signatures on these papers. This at the same time was done with the layout algorithm. You can think of it as like a computer vision algorithm will help you identify, well, a cat is a cat. This is a similar case, but rather you're looking at, well, a stamp is in the middle of this paper. That is the designated stamp from the election officer. So we were able to identify the stamps and signatures using this same layout model. From there, it goes to the final step of actually extracting the figures on the table. In the table, it would record how many votes for each political party. We were using a combination of this layout and Amazon Extract, which is a OCR service, to extract these numbers. The final step would be to verify these numbers from machine learning results. We also did verification for stamps and signatures with a combination of using scripts and doing crowdsourcing with humans actually checking if the stamp is there, if the results from the computer algorithm is correct or not. That's a very brief walkthrough. This is a 1.5-year process we took.
That's a lot of work. So what were some of the most significant findings that emerged from your data analysis? And what did the numbers reveal about the election's legitimacy?
Yeah, so part of the series, we published 4 different stories. Each one are looking into different aspects around the election, right? We focused on disinformation, malfeasance, suppression, and violations of the law. In all four different cases, we saw serious violations of what we call a legitimate election. From disinformation and how false narratives and hate speech or disinformation narratives make their way to social media, impacting both the elections as well as candidates and voters themselves. And also we saw in the other stories the way violence impacted the actual processing of elections and the results, meaning that we have seen a lot of attacks and different reasons for cancellation of results. And considering the very low participation, the very low turnout in these elections, combined with all the cancelled results, specifically during these elections, what one can easily see is that it's really a minority that takes matter in their hands and decide for the entire nation. And as you said in the intro, we are talking about the most populous nation in Africa. And I think that's a major finding in itself, and it's self-explanatory as well. Now, if we want to dive into more details, we can see how many of the polling units across the country didn't even upload the results that they had to upload. We saw that, instead of election results, local officers uploaded selfies or random pictures on the portal. We saw how manipulated results have been, meaning that we have seen alterations in the documents themselves. For example, a party could have taken 10 votes and that 10 votes were turned into 100 votes. And on the other side, maybe a party, received less votes and it was manufactured when it comes to results. So this I consider the main findings. In all four different stories, we show how the election has not really been a proper election. And when it comes to specific data points, again, it's about, for me, how many of these polling units across the country didn't manage to upload the results the way the results should have been uploaded.
All right, you see, so the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism operates across different regions. How did the West Africa Hub contribute to this particular investigation? And what does collaborative investigative journalism look like in practice?
Thanks, Winston. If you look at the stories we publish, one of them have more than 10 journalists in the bylines. So we worked extensively with these journalists for this specific story. From the very beginning, when we were investigating the documents, the journalists were helping us reviewing the documents using Google Pinpoint. We didn't use that finally, later when we developed further machine learning pipelines. But it gives us a very broad idea with that kind of collective efforts to identify the issues that we see in the documents. For example, we saw over 10,000 blurred documents. So those, when we were doing the initial reviewing the documents, we already see it from this collective effort where we were reviewing the documents and seeing what kind of issues could be there. And I think the major collaboration happened when we handed over these major data findings to journalists. Things like we saw in this area, the accredited number of voters is lower than the number of votes on this paper. So it seems like more people voted than were accredited. And in this specific area, we saw stamps are usually not on the paper, which is a compulsory component for the paper to be valid. And then the journalists take it to the fields to investigate. But as I mentioned earlier, it's not a one-direction conversation. We also get feedback from journalists. For example, in one particular area, we saw very polarized results. In, let's say, tens of kilometers, one polling unit or a couple of polling units in that place all voted for LP at a 90% rate, right? Everyone was voting for LP. And in a nearby place, everyone was voting for for APC, which seems like a sign of rigging if you look at it just from the data perspective. But what the journalists found out in the place is actually, well, although it's a very close by area, the Muslims are staying away from the Christians. So these are two communities living in a very nearby area. And the Muslims in their mosque were told by the imam to vote for APC. So it's actually like we couldn't call it rigging per se. This is something we saw strange in the data, but not really. So there were things like this, and there were things where we point out in a few areas where all the papers seems to be written by the same person, right? Which is strange. The same handwriting happened in polling units that's like tens of kilometers away and happened on like the same handwriting on about 6-7 papers. The journalists went to the area and found out, well, there were actually no election here. The election officer never showed up. And then someone, it seems like they just write up the results and uploaded them on the portal, and they counted that results. So there are also places where we found evidence that support our data finding from the journalists. There were a lot of conversations like this, a lot of back and forth like this, and communication with each journalist in the area that they were reporting about. I also learned a lot through the process from their on-the-ground experience. So I think, yeah, this is how we collaborated during this particular story. There could be definitely better ways of organizing it, because I feel like we usually chat on like WhatsApp and taking calls and so on. And they, like, the journalists were really kind to usually just take our calls, and where we have a query, they respond very quickly. But I guess it could be different in other places.
Okay, that was a long explanation, and I enjoyed every bit of it. And finally, we have come to the end, but I have one question for both of you. We'll start with Sotiris. What impact do you hope Democracy Deferred series will have on electoral transparency and democratic discourse in Nigeria and beyond?
Yeah, that's a great and difficult question, Winston. Impact takes time sometimes. It takes years or even decades. So my personal hope is that this series is the foundations of better and more transparent elections in the future, both in Nigeria and outside Nigeria. And also, when it comes to our profession as journalists, I wish and I hope that more journalists have more robust tools, ways, and methods and frameworks to investigate elections properly, to investigate all aspects around elections. And that's something we currently trying to build at CCIJ, a resource for other journalists, like a tool that helps them identify false information shared on social media about the elections. It's a new tool that we are building using different AI models and technologies, and we hope that this will become something for every journalist to use to analyze their data in order to find potential false narratives during the elections, of course, before and after the elections, and be able to identify who the key actors of these false narratives are, how they operate within their networks, what's their behavior, and how all these narratives evolve over time. So again, ultimately, impact would be more transparent elections in the future and more journalists reporting boldly on the elections, on their own contexts.
Okay, great. And for you, Yuxi, what impact do you hope Democracy Deferred series will have on electoral transparency and democratic discourse in Nigeria and other countries, of course?
Yeah, I think like during the project, we also had a group catch up in Nigeria where we visited several civil society organizations to see what projects they have on election and where we could collaborate on. I think that could plant a seed for our future investigation or intervention, because I see like a lot of people are working on election related stuff, and our strength was on the data perspective. But we were also sharing a lot of resources with each other, which is super, super important, I think, for holding the government accountable to get together and share the skills and the resources and the data. So that was part of the collaboration. And I think this is where it blurred a little bit, where we were talking about like journalism. And it's actually, when we are connecting with these civil society organizations, it probably goes a bit deeper into the activism part. We certainly hope that this project would help encourage journalists and citizens, especially data journalists, at least showing them, well, this is possible. And we were able to preserve the evidence, even though the government was trying to remove it. And the methodology, I think, could serve as a resource for future work like this. So we've also uploaded our methodology online, and it's open source, and people could use the data and the methodology. And finally, I'm not sure if it would be a good influence from the election commission part. We've definitely seen they remove the documents after the investigation. We are not sure exactly if it's linked or not. So what is the reason that they decided to remove these documents? When LP in Nigeria was contesting the election results, they also kind of phrased access to the documents for a while. So it seems like they don't want people to look at it, even though they made it so-called transparent. I think they would definitely build it differently for the next election. We hope they do it more transparently, making the data more accessible to citizens. But it's also possible that once they realize, well, this is something that a journalist or a citizen could do, they build up more walls to stop you from accessing it. So yeah, that part we start now.
All right, very briefly, I want you to tell our listener where they can find your work on social media or internet.
LinkedIn, Twitter, any kind of social media platform, and on our website, ccij.io and vesa.news.
All right, thanks so much. And that's a wrap up for this episode of Transparency Talks. We are grateful to Sotiris Sideris and Yuxi Wang for joining us today and sharing their insights into the vital work of data-driven investigative journalism and the groundbreaking Democracy Deferred series. Their work demonstrates how rigorous data analysis can cast a spotlight on the health of democratic institutions and hold electoral processes accountable. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to join us again next time for more conversations about truth, transparency, and trust. This has been your host, Winston Mwale. Bye for now.